In this video I'm going to show you the best way to prime and paint MDF. Oh yes, welcome to JBTV. How's it going guys? It's your man JB and we are going to be painting some MDF today. As you can see here, I've already got some MDF which has been primed up. This is actually for a job I'm currently working on. I brought them home into the workshop to work on them here. I have got a bit of MDF right here in front of me, and what we're going to be doing is looking at the best way, or the way that's worked best for me over the years whilst making furniture and all sorts out of MDF that also need painting. Now this project that I'm currently working on, as you can see, it is a sideboard that I'm building in somebody's hallway. There is a little bit of work to go yet. I've got some panelling to put on the front in front of the radiator section, but I brought the doors home and I thought I'd share with you how I'm preparing them, how I'm priming them and how I'm painting them. Now just quickly, for those of you who may not be aware what MDF is, MDF stands for medium density fiberboard, and it basically is fiberboard. You can get denser and lighter MDF, but your medium density is the standard really. Now it does have a really smooth finish on the face, which is great for painting, and we'll look at that in a moment. But the biggest issue we face with MDF is this edge, and particularly when it's cut, it does leave it feeling almost furry, and you can probably just about see that there. And this really does cause an issue for us painters and decorators, or cabinet makers, joiners, carpenters, people who just like to make stuff with wood. But it can be an issue if you're having to paint it afterwards. Now, to be honest, if you were the builder who was coming in and making something out of MDF, you wouldn't really worry about sanding it down too much. And I have done jobs in the past where people have made something out of MDF and the client has just said, I'd like that painted, and I've had to get it all ready and rub it down and all sorts. So thanks for that. But anyway, let's get back to the matter in hand. How are we going to get this MDF ready for painting, and how are we going to paint it? Now this isn't rocket science, and if you know what you're doing, then you're going to get a really good finish every time. Now you can buy MDF primer and sealer or primer undercoat for MDF. I've got to be honest, I've never ever used MDF primer. I don't know, I don't think it really makes much difference. What I've used on this particular project is just a standard primer undercoat. It has to be a primer undercoat. Now I never really use a solvent or oil-based paint on MDF, as in for the undercoat and primer. I've always used a water-based, and as you can see, this is an Albany primer undercoat. It's rather special, this one. This is super primer undercoat, but they'll all do the same job. Next thing, sorting out this edge, because we don't need to do anything with this face here. We can put the primer straight on this face because it is super smooth. What we do need to do though is just prep this edge a little bit. It is very smooth, it's very flat, it's actually looking quite good. There's a few saw marks in it, but this is only a demonstration. And really what we need to do is get that ready. What we don't want to do is just put the paint straight on top, really. You could do, but you're going to have to rub it down a couple more times. So what we're going to do is grab a piece of 120 paper and give that a quick sand. So to sand this edge, I'm going to use a piece of 120 paper. You might want to go for a bit of 80 grit paper if that's a bit rougher and there's some saw marks and what have you in there. But this is pretty good, so I'm going to stick to 120. Now if you're sanding the edges of MDF, it's really important to use a block or a flat surface. Otherwise, if you just use your hand, you're more likely to create a kind of arc and curve on the edge, and that will completely ruin this lovely square edge. Now because this edge is so thin and you can end up kind of making the block go a bit wonky on here, what I have found has helped in the past to actually clamp or screw another piece of wood along that same edge, so you've got a much wider bit of timber here to sand down, and it will prevent that block from rocking. Sanding or cutting MDF is really dusty, and this stuff isn't great. There's a lot of resin, glue, wood, what have you in it, so make sure you mask up when you're sanding MDF. Okay, so just a quick sand, didn't take much at all, but just have a look at that edge now if you can. That is now really, really smooth. Now these edges are a little bit sharp, so you might just want to take your paper and just run it just once or twice down that edge. It will still keep it nice and sharp, but it will just take that very edge off it. You've got different ways in which you can paint or prime your MDF. Now ideally, and what you'll see in most cases, particularly products and furniture that are sold in shops and other manufacturing places, is that they're sprayed, so they have an absolutely flat and flawless finish. Now most of us don't have the facilities to be able to do that, and it can be quite messy and you've got a lot of setting up to do. So the options we've got at home are either to brush paint it. Now that's not too bad, but the only issue with doing it with a brush is that you are very, very likely to see brush marks. If you're using oil-based paint, it does flatten a lot more, but if you're using water-based, I guarantee you will see those brush marks. We can also roll it on. Now this roller here, this is a standard emulsion roller, and you know what, you could probably get away with this. It's quite thick, it's got quite a long nap, and it would be alright, but it might leave it just a little bit rough. You know, we want to try and get it as flat and smooth as possible. So what I'm going to use is this roller, which is a lot finer, it's a lot thinner, it's not as long, it's almost woolly. It's very smooth, it's a very soft fabric, so this gives a really, really nice flat finish. You could also use a foam roller. They tend to work quite well, although I would usually use this with a gloss paint, an oil-based gloss paint, but you know what, horses for courses. So we'll put these two to one side for a minute, and because I'm only using a small amount of primer, only going to be using it on this, I'm just going to use this small paint tray here, because once we've primed this, we're going to move on to this stage, which is basically these have been primed, so we'll look at painting those next. So let's get our paint. So we've got our super primer undercoat. I've also primed and wet my roller and my brush. Always get them wet, give them a spin like that, just makes them a bit easier to clean, and they roll and brush a little bit better. Now I want to do both sides of this bit of MDF. I want to do that side and that side, because one of the issues with MDF is, particularly this MDF, it will react to moisture. Now if we were to just paint this side, it would bow. It would bow, and it's very, very difficult to get that bow out. If you've had any MDF sitting in your garage for a while as well, you might notice that that's got a bit of a bow in it. And that's because the moisture's got in and it's affected the structure of the MDF. So what we need to do here is make sure we paint both sides straight away. Now you can get moisture resistant MDF, and that will basically resist the moisture and it's less likely to bow. But this is going inside, it's not going to get wet, it is going to be sealed and painted, so there's no issue here. But how are we going to paint both sides without putting it on a flat surface and getting paint everywhere. Well, let me show you. What I've done here is cut 4 blocks, well I've got 8 actually, but I've cut 4 blocks and I've put a screw in it so it sticks out like this. Now be careful, because screws are quite sharp, so you don't want to be standing or putting your hand on it. But basically what we'll do, we'll put these 4 blocks down here, so once we've done one side we can flip it over and we can sit it on the screws as we go around the edge. Now if this is the back face, do this first, so paint that, put it on the screws, then you can do your top face. And the great thing about using these is because it's got such a point on it, you will hardly see any mark that it's left on the board. You can buy something very similar to this on Amazon. I'll stick a link in the box below. I just like making my own ones really, but there you go. So I'm going to paint this face and this edge, so let's get cracking. Takes a little bit of time to get the roller going, because they really do take up quite a bit of paint, but this isn't going to take long at all, so let's just get those in position and let's go. And guys, we just do this one face. Probably got enough paint on there just to do that one face. Do make sure that you spread it evenly, don't leave any tram lines in there, and if you see any little bits of dry paint or dirt, just make sure you get those out straight away. So that's how your first face should look. It's pretty good, isn't it? And that primer is good stuff. So we'll flip this round, we'll put that right there, so it's on the screws, and what I'm going to do next is just put that roller along that edge. Try and let it roll. It's a little bit tricky sometimes, particularly if you've got too much paint on there. It doesn't always allow the roller to roll, but again, just try and get that smooth as you can without getting any on your workbench. There we go, that'll do. We'll just load that up a little bit more and then we can do that top face again. There we go. So if you were doing round all the edges like I've done on here, then you would go all the way round obviously. But right now, both sides and one edge have been primed and undercoated. So fantastic, first stage done. We'll leave that for a moment and then we'll crack on with these bigger doors. If you're in warm conditions, this won't take too long to dry. This has had about an hour and a half, to be honest. It's not the warmest day today, but that's definitely dry enough to potentially give it another coat. So if the undercoat primer that you've used has still left it quite dark, then you may want to consider putting another coat on top. But before you do that, just get yourself a piece of 180 paper and just give it a very light sand, just to get rid of any little lumps or bumps that are in there. But I'm going to put this to one side now, because these doors that are part of my project, these have had one coat of exactly the same primer undercoat as that piece of MDF. So basically I'm not going to give it another coat of primer, because I'm going to give this 2 coats of top coat, and it's pretty good stuff that I'm using, so I know that the coverage is going to be really good. But what I need to do before I do that first coat is to prepare this. Between each coat, it's a really good idea to give it a sand down. Well, it's not really a good idea, it's actually vital, to be honest. And 180 grit paper is ideal for sanding between coats. It's not going to do a lot of damage, but it does get it really smooth. So I'll start off by doing the 2 faces and then I'll do the edges. So we don't need to use a block for this, but I've just folded a piece over about that size, and we'll just go over it and just rubbing your hand around it at the same time, just to make sure there are no imperfections or lumps in there. over the whole surface. Really doesn't need to be much, and you will feel straight away that that is really smooth. If only this video was 4D and you could actually feel it. So the edges are exactly the same. Now you could use a block, but I'm not going to need to sand this a lot, so I'm literally just going to go over that top edge like so. Now the undercoat and primer, what that will do is actually harden the fibres in the MDF. So once that's had a coat of paint and it's dried properly, and then you give it a rub down, that then becomes super smooth. We'll give it a quick dusting off. Now for the top coat, I'm using this Dulux Trade quick dry satin wood, and this gives an absolutely fantastic finish, and of course it does dry quite quickly. So let's crack this open. Again, really worth the money going for a good quality paint that is going to give you really good coverage. The last thing you want to do is buy a paint that just takes coats and coats to cover. So I'm going to use a scuttle this time, a small scuttle, just because I'm going to need a bit more paint and I don't really want to keep filling up the small tray. And I'm using the same roller, this very fine fluffy roller. So the other thing about using these blocks with a screw in is that once I've turned it over, I can still do the edge. Otherwise, if it is flat on a surface, it makes it a little bit tricky. So nice and even rolling. You can definitely tell there's not enough paint getting onto that roller just yet. So I want a good finish here, but I am going to be doing another coat, so I'm not going to be too worried about it being absolutely perfect, and I'm not going to stress if there's a tiny little bit that I've missed, although it doesn't happen often, you know. Right, there you go, that's that side done. So what we'll do, we'll flip it over. Worth just running your hand over it before you start, just to make sure there are no little bits left on there. Okay, so I need to do that edge first. Don't put too much paint on your roller for this, because it sometimes prevents the roller from rolling. And then we just finish off on that front face again. There we go. That's that one done. So completely covered, and once that's dry, we'll give that another coat and that'll look pretty good. So there's the finish on the first coat, and you can see with the light in the background there, or the reflection of the light, that looks pretty nice. Well, it's now been about 4 hours since these were painted, and they are definitely ready for another coat. They are more than touch dry, and you can hardly see where the screws were hitting this side of the boardlet, so that is a brilliant way to get both sides painted at the same time. So what I need to do now is to put a second coat on, and this will finish painting a piece of MDF, or in this case finish painting this door and the 3 other doors, which I will paint afterwards. So the next thing we need to do is to grab our 180 paper again. Now it doesn't need a lot of sanding at all, but just run your hand over it and very lightly just give it a very slight rub and just feel it, rub it, feel it, rub it, feel it. Get it really smooth, because you will feel just a couple of bits of fluff or dirt or something, but give it a few wipe overs with the paper, and it even hardly any dust, so that's not an issue. So on the edges, once again, they will feel rougher. The edges will feel rougher, so just a light rub with the paper and you should get those almost silky smooth. You can almost see that it's a little bit grey in the odd place here and there, but a second coat will definitely sort that out. So we'll give it a quick dust off. There we go, and that's feeling lovely and ready to go. So let's hit this side of the door. So once again, start with the back side of the door, or the side of the panel that you're not really going to see, only because you get those small pin marks where the screws are, but they are very minimal. I really want to make sure I get good coverage this time, because two coats, two top coats should definitely be enough. So I'm not going to try and spread this too thin. I'm not going to make it too thick either. That can definitely be a mistake. There we go, so that is done, that side's done. So we'll just flip that over. So we'll do these edges first. And I always finish it off just by doing long strokes all the way along, just so you haven't got any marks where you can see you've dipped or hit the panel with the roller right in the middle of the board. And that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now that is now finished. Two coats and looking pretty good. So there we go, you can see that with the reflection of the light in there. Those edges look absolutely amazing. Just get a little bit of a shot on those as well. Look at that. And that is how you paint MDF. Well, that's how I paint it anyway. This is the way I've always done it, and I've never had any issues with it. So we gave it one coat of undercoat primer, and it's had two top coats, and the paint's pretty good quality as well, so make sure you get some good stuff. If you've got any questions about painting MDF, just leave those in the comments box below and I'll do my best to respond. If you're not already following me on Instagram, go ahead and do so. There are details in the description box down below, and start following me. And what I will do in a few weeks, trying to think when I'm going to be doing it, yeah, in a few weeks I should be posting some pictures of the finished sideboard that I'm building. So I think there's a couple on there now, mid-build, but I will put some finished pictures on there, so go check that out. I do hope you found this video interesting and helpful, and hopefully you can go out now and paint yourself some MDF. Awesome guys, thanks for watching, I'll see you on the next video.